In the gentle haze of the 1950s, a decade marked by charming domesticity and aprons better ironed than most peace treaties, there was a secret life simmering beneath the surface of suburbia. As the sun dipped low, painting the world in soft pastels, we find ourselves peeking through lace curtains at the thrilling escapades of housewives who are not quite as ordinary as they seemed. Picture this. Tupperware parties with their click-clap lids were all the rage, a sort of containment system for leftovers and avant-garde gossip. Mrs. Mildred Popinwell, a petite woman with a penchant for floral prints and a strategically coiffed beehive, was the reigning queen of these parties. But beyond her devout love for leftovers stored immaculately, Mildred harbored a secret more effervescent than the Kool-Aid she so generously poured. It all began one crisp Tuesday, when Mildred, rather tired of the humdrum routine of vacuuming and varnishing, envisioned herself as a clandestine cargo smuggler, not the kind with contraband so scandalous it writes its own tabloid, but something far more benign: vanilla extract. During the post-war period, vanilla was more precious than gold-leafed bath soaps, and its illicit trading was thought to be the height of domestic rebellion. As children and spouses alike sunk into their nightly rituals, blissfully unaware of their mother's exploits, Mildred deftly converted a snack cupboard into a secret compartment worthy of espionage novels. Her husband, Harold, known for his extraordinary capacity to fail at detecting any disturbance of the spice rack, remained blissfully unaware, devoted more to his model train set than paternal surveillance. But one breezy winter night, when the wind itself whispered delicious secrets, Mrs. Popinwell's evening took a twist even her wildest Batterball musings could not have predicted. Enter Mrs. Agatha Pinter, neighborhood busybody and self-proclaimed scent detective, whose olfactory senses were supposedly as sharp as a lemon rind. During a particularly lively Tupperware gathering, Agatha caught a whiff of something far more beguiling than overcooked Brussels sprouts. "Is that pure Madagascar bourbon?" she blurted, accusingly squinting at Mildred over a daisy tablecloth. The room hushed to a whisper, partygoers frozen as if on a Life magazine cover, awaiting Mildred's retort. With a magnanimous chuckle soft enough to diffuse a bomb, Mildred merely shook her head, offering yet another plate of deviled eggs. "Only my famous vanilla custard requires such a pedigree," she quipped, reinvigorating the laughter with her nimble wit. The moment steered away as breezily as a freshly buttered scone on a tabletop. And so Mildred's covert operation remained concealed under layers of chiffon and cherry pie crusts. Yet one could argue that the swap of herbs and extracts at these gatherings formed bonds stronger than any bridge club or PTA endeavor, a secret web woven through the aromatic cloak of middle-class normality. If you've indulged in this tale and find your eyes closing at the edges, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade away into dreamland, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. As shadows grow longer in the winding streets of suburbia, the stage is set for another whimsical tale. But for now, let your eyelids flutter like lace curtains on a sunny, windswept day. In the hush of early morning, when suburban streets lay draped with dew and dreams hold firm grips on groggy patrons, we tiptoe quietly into the modest homes of 1950s America. Ah, the 50s, a time when white picket fences shielded what lay beyond them, much like the impeccable ladies of the era shielded their oh-so-interesting secrets beneath perfectly coiffed hairdos. These women, who seemed to have stepped out of a Sears catalogue, were not merely living mannequins of respectability. No, they were far more colorful than the bland palettes of their pastel kitchens suggested. Imagine, if you will, the scene inside one of these homes, a kitchen that smells faintly of Maxwell House coffee and ambition. Enters our star, Mildred Smith, an ordinary woman who marries her ordinary name with extraordinary stealth. Mildred is best known for her uncanny ability to disguise store-bought cherry pies as homemade. Her methods, which involved a covert operation of pie swapping that would make any Cold War spy raise an eyebrow, became the stuff of suburban legend, But Mildred had a secret life, one that skirted the edges of legality, like a rebellious skirt testing dress code boundaries. It began innocently enough. One day, while reading a magazine article about recycling, which naturally only served as a page-turner between gossip columns, Mildred's eyes twinkled with a new understanding. Recycling was, after all, about adapting old things into something new. Why not do this with financial paperwork? Thus, the unconventional craft of checkbook adjusting was born. Mildred developed a peculiar talent for turning her husband Bob's salary into an expenditure art form. With a deft hand that combined algebra and artistry, she repurposed bank statements to allow for a persisting surplus. You see, Mildred's approach to multiplication and subtraction had a flair not even Einstein could rival, though one might say it defied a few elementary school math lessons. Every Friday, Mildred would attend her coffee clatch, a riotous ensemble of laughter and spontaneous, incomprehensible cross-stitch patterns. It was here that she subtly passed along her financial wizardry under the unsuspecting guise of cookies recipes, exchanged like secret blueprints. Soon, apartments across town saw a mysterious rise in minor improvements. Lawn ornaments that sparkled with suburban promise, glossier paint on mailboxes. Indeed, Mildred had sparked a movement rooted deeply in benign, domestic rebellion. Yet, as with all things ungoverned, Mildred's crafty bookkeeping hit an inevitable stumbling block. With a charm and deftness that would have impressed even Fagin from Oliver Twist, she managed to keep one step ahead of the household budget enforcer, Bob, who was habitually distracted by the newspapers forecasting the inevitable triumph of air conditioning. But even Mildred's agile fingers could weave only so complex a tapestry before the threads began to unravel. One day, as the clatter of evening news filled the living room, Bob's attention shifted from local happenings to a peculiar document that had wormed its way loose from Mildred's desk drawer. Its pages fluttered with numbers that made mathematicians wince and seem reminiscent of a dizzying game of hopscotch. Gentle euphoria from suddenly abundant savings was quickly replaced with bewildered arithmetic panic. How had their household budget featured gimlet and sequined bud vases? Mildred's improvisational financing had caught up. A household confrontation ensued that was notable for its lack of noticeable voices. Mildred had a gift not only for dissembling finances, but also for deftly navigating domestic turbulence, a skill undoubtedly enhanced by her regular viewing of midday soap operas. As Mildred explained herself with theatrical flair, and quite possibly some real tears, an unspoken truce was born. The incident made its way into family law, reduced to a tale involving a math error and forgotten with the washing of Sunday dishes. Nevertheless, despite the financial patchwork and clandestine pie artistry, our dear Mildred remained a beloved community figure, earning a small slice of infamy that hovered harmlessly over subsequent block parties. And so, as the tranquil night wraps its velvet shadow over another day, we leave Mildred puzzled over a crossword by lamplight, forever dreaming of pie crust and slightly askew computations. As you slip into the gentle embrace of sleep, dream of these remarkable women whose domestic capers left traces on history, traces we shall continue to uncover like hidden treasures in the chapters to come. As the clock rolled into 1954, a peculiar hush descended upon the fragrant suburbs. Daffodils nodded dreamily in the yards, as did the neighbors, who whispered behind perfectly manicured hedges. You might suppose their conversations were of garden parties and the newest lawnmowers, but you'd be underestimating the daring flair of these 1950s housewives, who, unbeknownst to most, were quietly revolutionizing their kitchen utensils into clandestine tools of mischief. Picture, if you will, the morning sun gently pooling through a freshly starched lace curtain, spotlighting the scene of Mildred Thompson, a quiet stalwart of Harper's Lane. From her spotless kitchen, Mildred appeared the very model of a devoted housewife, complete with an apron adorned in cheerful daisies. But beneath her disarming smile lay Mildred's guilty secret. She was the mastermind behind the most impressive ring of pie crust smugglers this side of the Mississippi. Now one might wonder, why pie crusts? The answer is whimsically simple. With post-war food restrictions having only recently lifted, the simple joy of a buttery, flaky pie was akin to striking gold. And Mildred had stumbled upon a recipe so exquisite that merely its aroma could move mountains, or at least sway the favor of the local knitting club. She began by trading them, incidentally, a crust for a well-stocked knitting basket. However, her pies soon took on a life of their own, commandeered at bridge clubs and PTA meetings, progressing from benign indulgence into a covert market. Like a cryptic pastry-pied piper, Mildred's following grew, creating a network of accomplices eager for the magic of her crust, a neat twist of fate Mildred had yet to reveal to her husband, who remained blissfully oblivious to the aroma that wafted night after night through their little abode. In the soft glow of evening, Mildred's kitchen metamorphosed into a clandestine bakery. She danced around, a veritable sugar plum fairy, orchestrating dough with a deftness that would impress even the most hardened mind of a criminal. There was a daring delight in it, a secret thrill in conducting an operation that swirled with flour and whispered promises of conversions over cups of steaming dough. But let us not forget the unsung hero of our tale, the rolling pin of destiny, as Mildred liked to call it. It was a fierce tool whose wielding spoke of power and precision. Amongst the wives of the town, tales abounded of its indomitable presence, how the mere flourish of its handle was enough to tame the most unruly of pie ingredients. Some even said it could double as a baton should the local band require an impromptu conductor, though these rumors were decidedly unfounded. Yet, with every operation, there came the delightful tingle of risk as, mischievous as lemon zest, illuminating her clandestine efforts in a world where the rules were carefully crafted by men with ironed suits and fedoras. Mildred, who had never quite broken a rule in her day-to-day life, found herself exhilarated by the subtle rebellion, even as she buttered her tins with the precision of a watchmaker. But mingling amongst suburbia's scent of freshly cut grass and Sunday roasts, there bubbled a sensation Mildred hadn't accounted for, the whisper of curiosity tiptoeing onto her doorstep. Mrs. Hudson, from 2 doors down, with her keen sense for neighborhood nuances, had sniffed out a scent richer than her morning brew. Mystery. Armed with freshly inked curiosity, she began to probe with the stealth of a cat burglar, gradually piecing together the latticework of Mildred's enterprise. There, in the soft haze of twilight, lies Mildred's talent, her crime, some may say, a simple exercise in the art of pie-making that rippled gently beneath the calm veneer of suburbia. And as the sleepy town drifted deeper into oblivion, Mildred tucked her secret close, as one would with a beloved heirloom, sighing gleefully in the quiet embrace of night, her kitchen, her chapel, her pies, her sermon. Her cozy secret, so deliciously ordinary yet tinged with the romance of intrigue, remained delicate, like the crusts themselves, thin, enticing, and liable to crumble under the wrong touch. But tonight, under a sky peppered tenderly with stars, all was perfectly calm. As Mildred turned off the light and the neighborhood succumbed to sleep's tender lullaby, her story simmered on, ripe for the next unforeseen chapter in this tapestry of delightful domestic deviance. In the picturesque 1950s, where suburban blouses were carefully ironed and every cul-de-sac was its own sleepy hamlet, the humdrum of housewifery hummed on like an unsung symphony of daily routines. It was said that June Cleaver could vacuum her carpet in pearls without batting an impeccably mascaraed eyelash. Yet tucked behind those white picket fences, wrapped in the aroma of freshly baked cookies, some housewives concocted far more unconventional recipes, like breaking the law. This brings us to the cheery town of Muncie, Indiana, where the lawns were mowed with the precision of a Marine's haircut, and Betty Braxton lived in what seemed the ideal domestic utopia. Betty wasn't just any housewife. She was the reigning queen of the Tupperware party circuit. Her ability to burble with enthusiasm about resealable lids could earn her a standing ovation. But Betty wasn't content with being merely the sultan of plastic storage. She dreamed of managing something more liquid, like, say, cold hard cash. Thus, Betty clandestinely adopted the role of an underground Avon lady. In an age when makeup was as essential as air, Betty saw an opportunity to slip past the legal boundaries like a soft brush of rouge. Avon calling was an official business that brought with its sweet commission checks, but Betty turned the knock on the door into a discreet art form. Pass a powder puff, pass a fiver, it was all very cloak and dagger, in a featherweight sort of way. Raiding the domains of a patriarchal society, Betty flexed her financial muscles under the guise of lipstick samples and perfume beads. Her secret enterprise flourished quietly behind closed doors, where her house became a veritable speakeasy of cuticle cream and eyeshadow, a veritable treasure trove for the glamour-starved women of the post-war era. In the kaleidoscope of American ingenuity, the 1950s also bore witness to the quiet rebellion of the housewife card parties. Around polished dining tables, these domestic doyens shuffled decks with the deftness of Vegas sharks, while the men frittered away hours at the office, claiming overtime or eternal emergency meetings. The ladies of the block embarked on clandestine poker nights that would shame the most seasoned of gamblers. Millie Harper, the orchestrator of these renegade games, possessed a knack for handling cards that would leave any Las Vegas dealer asking for tips. Her bridge games were cover stories so intricate that even the most meticulous spin doctor would applaud. Visualize an evening brimming with exaggerated clam dip, whispers and furtive dollars, swapping hands while toddlers napped upstairs, blissfully ignorant of their mother's nocturnal gallivanting. Naturally, it was only a matter of time before these escapades made their way onto the radar of the neighborhood watch, often a collection of the very same housewives wearing their secondary hats. Instead of condemning the wildcard adventures, they commended them with rapturous applause, delighted to revel in the thrill of it all. With a clink of iced tea glasses disguising something just a tad stronger, these housewives turned rebels carried the heavens of escapism on their apron-covered shoulders, throwing off the shackles of the June cleaver, stereotype with a stealthy grin. As the stars twinkled like a flickering living room lamp, those evenings spilled over into early hours, secrets shared, covered, and tucked away with laughter that wound back through the narrow avenues of the town. In truth, these happenings bore the very lifeblood of camaraderie and the unspoken solidarity of parenthood, tucked away neatly in a time capsule, a snapshot of history, adorned in floral wallpaper. And wouldn't you know it, in a world teetering on the edge of conformity, it was the ordinary housewives who whispered sweet nothings to the otherwise monotonous ticks of time. The quiet magnitude of their subtly rebellious undertakings resonated with the unsung triumphs of history, a reminder that in the heart of dullness beat the vibrant and vivacious rhythm of life itself. With our eyelids growing heavy and the night deepening, let us set sail to find what other secrets slumber unnoticed in quaint corners of history, both amusing and one profound. In the dimly lit kitchens of the 1950s, a revelation simmered quietly, concealed under layers of neatly folded gingham and butter-yellow linoleum. Our tale tonight whisks us into the very heart of suburbia, a place where lawns were meticulously hedged, and secrets, much like the coq au vin simmering on the stove, were kept ever so delightfully under wraps. Picture, if you will, the archetypal housewife. Hair curled to pin precision, apron rendered spotless by some sorcery beyond the understanding of mere mortals. These women were masters of multitasking before Marie Kondo sparked joy in closets. But beneath their perfectly powdered exteriors, some harbored clandestine enterprises that could make even the craftiest of detectives scratch their heads and reconsider the power of the cupcake. Let's first amble our way over to the charming abode of Mrs. Mildred Thompson. To the untrained eye, Mildred seemed to be the personification of the ordinary, until her little hobby was unearthed. You see, while her husband was earning a modest living at the local hardware store, Mildred was making a killing, quite literally. Known in secret as the Clipping Bandit, She was the scourge of the neighborhood hedges, a phantom of the flora. By night, she roamed the streets with garden shears in hand, leaving nothing but shorn shambles. The prize hedge trimmer in a national contest. Oh, there were whispers about rightful ownership indeed. Venturing a shade further up the block, we meet Mrs. Agnes Carlyle. A woman of genteel inclination, Agnes held salon sessions that put the Algonquin Round Table to shame, while her husband, Harold, believed the weekly book club discussions commenced at 4 p.m. sharp. Agnes was actually organizing what could only be described as the neighborhood's first ever proto-stock market. Housewives would clandestinely trade ration coupons and Betty Crocker points with the seriousness of Wall Street brokers negotiating deals with the deft precision of a commuter train schedule. A loaf of homemade sourdough could fetch a princely sum in babysitting exchanges. It was magic, in a way, how Agnes turned baked goods into social currency. And then there was Lucy Fitzgerald, Betty Draper's style icon, whose postman came calling suspiciously often. Folks suspected a tête-à-tête. However, Lucy's secret was far more ingenious. She was operating the nation's most inconspicuous intelligence-gathering service, using magazines. Her coded correspondence ran through the letters section of Housekeeping Weekly, where domestic woes served as the cover for lines of inquiry more suited to ME5. Blending gossip with geopolitics was her specialty. Would she have stopped the Cold War? Had anyone ever deciphered it? We can only muse wistfully. All these intrigues, echoing the quiet revolutions occurring behind the placid facades of post-war tranquility. In a world just recovering from shattering conflict, why were these housewives, armed with whisks and wit, brewing a different kind of storm? Perhaps it was merely the spice of invention, or the solace found in small acts of subversion during those conventional days. As the sun set over another picturesque evening, the kitchen windows softly illuminated these unsung orchestrators of suspense and serenity alike. Their adventures might have gone unnoticed, swallowed by the sprawling narrative of forgotten history. Yet, tonight you have wandered into their world, rocking gently on the waves of their quiet chaos. Perhaps, as you drift off to dreams, you might see yourself in a charming polka dot dress, knowing little glints of mischief make life not only bearable, but irresistible. With these dreamy recollections of hemline-high espionage, let every cricket's chirp and every ticking clock become the soft countdown to sleep, and may the subtle hum of ordinary magic continue to lull you into slumber. What secrets shall we unfurl next? One might ponder, but for now, let's embrace the descent into serene dreams. Under the placid surface of the 1950s suburbia, a place where everything seemed wrapped in pastel perfection and all the cul-de-sacs led to sparkling clean front yards, there existed a universe of unspoken competition. It was a world where appearances weren't just everything. They were survival. And this battleground was famously dotted with rotary phones, jello salads, and, surprise, a few remarkable audacities. Welcome to the clandestine world of Tupperware parties, not just a gathering of aproned peers exchanging delightful gossip over molded plastic marvels, but a cauldron of culinary chicanery and low-risk espionage. This was a time when the kitchen was both domain and den of plots, where housewives conducted operations with the precision of a Cold War spy. Enter Mrs. Mildred Goodwin, our protagonist of mischief this chapter, a benign force of nature with a secret subtlety that rivals the Loch Ness Monster, mostly because you couldn't quite prove her existence beyond fringe reports from neighbors. Rumors in hushed tones floated around the neighborhood that her famous 3-layer chiffon cake held the key to winning the Bake-Off of the century, a title fiercely contested yearly at their suburban community house. Mildred's recipe, though supposedly a prized family secret, passed through generations with the whisper of a sugar sachet, was in reality a swift acquisition from a pilfered envelope belonging to an unsuspecting Betty from 2 houses down during a casual Tupperware soiree. The envelope in question had found its way into Mildred's purse with the stealth of a particularly sneaky cat, while everyone was distracted by the shimmering layers of avocado dip. being unveiled in clear Tupperware artistry. As she laid her self-professed masterpiece on the competition table, concealed beneath effortless ribbons of icing by her own hand, she smiled a contented smile, a satisfying, sick blend of cinnamon and conquest. Meanwhile, the crowd of rivals applauded her artistry, oblivious to the fact their precious recipes were perpetually at risk of being co-opted for the greater good of Mildred. Such was the perfectly poised performance of these housewife gatherings, a concurrent symphony of sincerity and unsuspicious competition. Now, let's drift deeper. Within the privacy of their daily homemaking activities found other opportunities for camaraderie and trickery. Swapping cleaning supplies or secrets, or maybe sometimes inadvertently using a dusting spray labeled water and freshwater pearls amidst afternoon chatter and conversation. These were all parts of the subversive arts, hidden behind floral curtains and pretty pink kitchen aprons. We must niggle gently into this quiet pandemonium and say, was it all malicious? Perhaps a guidebook titled, How to Charm Your Neighbors While Quietly Besting Them would have sufficed. But these noble ladies wrote their manuals, in sauce smudges and tea stains. The code was unwritten, much like the original lard crumb-stained recipe papers they often passed around. In the sleepy swirl of 1950s societal norms, Mildred and her cohorts were architects of an unlicensed law school, learning daily lessons in sly perseverance and small triumphs over neighbors. They never sought moments of loud glory, only the sweet smirk of reward in the form of baking trophies and whispered admiration. Moreover, the real artistry lay not in the act itself, but in the delight of casual escapades beneath the otherwise mundane, yet carefully maintained facades of their lives. As we wave goodbye to Mildred, who undoubtedly spends the rest of her day reshaping the culinary future from twisted shreds of neighborhood ingenuity, we pause too at the beauty of these secret rebellions, however muted. And with that, our exploration into the Tupperware trenches and chiffon cake espionage must gently recede. We leave Mildred on her porch, another day of delicious deception tucked under her belt as she waves her goodbyes to unsuspecting neighbors with a twinkle in her eye and sleeps soundly in her bed of unsanctioned triumph. Our journey through these small, audacious crimes segues into the cacophony of classic music that spills into living rooms, or does it? And the calming effluvia of the next untold secret binds our minds with curiosity for what's truly domesticated in this suburban landscape. So for now, drift deeply into those thoughts and let the silk liner of Mildred's cookie-laden tale caress your dreams. In the land of formica countertops and perfectly coiffed hair, the 1950s housewife was the orchestrator of a domestic symphony. But beneath those pastel-toned aprons and impeccably ironed house dresses simmered a quiet rebellion. You might imagine her day filled with sewing buttons and gleaming silverware, perhaps while practicing the fine art of gelatin mold making, but you'd be surprised to learn that under that bouffant, all sorts of scandalous mischief brewed. Let's take a gentle stroll down Riverview Lane, where Betty, a wholesome mother of three, decided to embark on a shocking adventure of forgery. Yes, you heard right. This involved meticulous penmanship, which was rather fortunate since Betty was already well-versed in crafting the impeccable, looping script that dictated all letters to school teachers and Christmas cards. However, Betty's new skill was reserved not for friendly correspondence but for her husband's signature on insurance papers. Risky? Certainly. Inspired? Quite. As she delicately took her husband's fountain pen, the one he fervently used for crossword puzzles, Betty's hand danced across the paper, a study in grace, much like the gentle glide of a glistening swan on a still lake. Indeed, Betty had the artist's touch. The insurance man never suspected. In fact, the only odd detail ever detected on those very forms was an extraordinary improvement in her husband's spelling. Drifting from forging to fiction, Betty wandered into petty crime with a peculiar penchant for prize-winning pie theft. Every Tuesday at the local Women's Circle bake-off, she'd cunningly switch her own coconut cream disaster for Mrs. Hargrove's blue ribbon spectacle. Nobody knew that under the many layers of batter and deception was not just a crime against pies, but against the very fabric of social trust at these quaint gatherings. Yet her motivations were rarely malevolent. In truth, they were a spirited dose of mischief mixed with a hint of competitiveness, as sweet as her pilfered pie. Betty had no desire for the accolades, only the sheer thrill of seeing the slightly cross-stitched envy etched into her neighbors' browlines as they scrabbled to figure out how she had achieved such perfection under that kitchen's relentlessly buzzing fluorescent light. Meanwhile, Margaret, a few doors down, harbored a less audacious but equally cheeky habit of altering her children's report cards. While her neighbors criticized her for simply perpetuating perfection, she saw it differently. Why should Johnny's slightly errant spelling blemish his chance to impress their guests at dinner parties? It was, after all, important to mention that Betty didn't have a son named Johnny. But that didn't stop her from telling distant relatives he was inventing a way to predict the weather using only spoons and the family dog. And there, in the dim embrace of late afternoon, when Betty felt the world pause for a sleepy moment, she would giggle softly to herself, knowing she had just turned the ordinary into the extraordinary, at least in her little corner of Riverview Lane. As the glow of the television ignited the living room, a common beacon in the warm sea of household tranquility, Betty would sit, a bowl of popcorn shared with her husband, who remained blissfully unaware of his wife's proclivity for minor swindle and major pie relocation. The only fade in their monochrome bliss was the strange discussion of how much Johnny reminded him of a young Einstein, despite having no idea about the existence of said Albert. And as Betty's eyelids grew heavy, indulged by the gentle lull of canned laughter from the screen, she secretly reveled in her day's tiny triumphs, embracing the shenanigans that added a twinkle of zest to the predictable vanilla routine of that suburban idyll. In the soft glow of that 1950s living room, one might wonder about what tomorrow's mischief would bring. As Betty tucked herself into bed with feathers of guilt as light as the down in her pillows, somewhere in the distance, the whistle of the milkman denoted the close of another thrillingly quiet day. With a smiling sigh, we leave Betty here, momentarily pausing this tale of innocence with a sly nod to tomorrow's potential misadventures. A gentle sigh in the blanket of time that wraps our slumbering storyteller as we drift into the sweet embrace of dreamy oblivion. Nestled in the shade of meticulously pruned dogwood trees, we find ourselves dropped elegantly into an utterly quiet suburban lane from the mid-20th century. The air is thick with the scent of overwatered roses and freshly baked apple pie, laced with a hint of post-World War II optimism, and perhaps the fumes of Aunt Margaret's latest burnt casserole. Here, in this seemingly sleepy neighborhood, a domestic revolt is afoot, a rebellion waged with the trusty implements of a 1950s housewife, rolling pins, shoehorns, and the occasional cunningly deployed shopping list. Yes, dear listener, tonight we delve into the audacious underbelly of mid-century suburban life, where the shockingly cunning plots of ordinary 1950s housewives unfold. While their husbands righteously switched out ties for tool belts, the ladies of the homes quietly shouldered the infamous chores of war, or rather, skirmishes against humdrum routines. Picture, if you will, a row of vibrant matchbox homes harboring the great chess game of laundry, baking, and social maneuvering. All those starched aprons and lacquered hairstyles, each a silent weapon in mastering household logistics and converting it into a realm of rich, domestic power. Take, for instance, Edith of 47 Spruce Lane. To the untrained eye, she was just another perfectly coiffed woman with a fondness for floral prints. But beneath that charming veneer lay a tactical genius with an astute ability to consolidate power through the bounce and fluff of a new-age washing machine. Sacking her former foes, the washboard and manual clothes wringer, Edith, with the precision of a general, had marshaled her time and energy with military efficiency. Housework was her battlefield, and her laundry room, a well-oiled command center. Rumor has it, her whites were so dazzling that neighbors complained of ocular damage when glancing directly at her clothesline. And then there was Dolores, whose culinary warfare was second to none. Her arches were hidden under curls and sometimes pin curls, containing bobby pins sharper than any Roman legion spear. Noted in the town for her deep dish diplomacy, she wielded her casserole dish like a master painter with a brush. Dolores's art of subduing neighborhood disputes with strategic servings of tuna noodle bake was legendary. Each layer of pasta-laden peace offering delivered with a polite smile, and the swift force of a bulldozer made neighbors adore and fear her just enough to abide by her silent decrees on lawn gnome placements. Even church collections were not untouched by this delicate web of suburban espionage. Mary, the unofficial record keeper of the Saccharine Choir Committee, uncovered a hidden propensity for clandestine bookkeeping sleuthing. With each collected coin and bill, she compiled not just funds for the church roof, long overdue for repair, but an insight into her peers' charitable dispositions and gin pocketbooks. These murmurings over offertory trays provided echoes in shaping neighborhood allegiances, or deciding who was left out of the next bridge game. Amidst all this domestic intrigue, the era's technological marvels became the figurative iron fist within velvet gloves. Early adapters of dishwashers, vacuum cleaners, and even automatic bread slicers became the silent powerhouses of productivity, flying through their daily tasks with an almost terrifying efficiency. One can only imagine the covert competitiveness at Betty's annual bake-off, with its notorious but unspoken rivalry and judiciously monitored lemon meringue margins. Thus, emboldened by innovation and ingenuity, these housewives crafted their realms with silent determination and a sprinkle of sugar at social gatherings. For them, the mundane pathways of grocery aisles and PTA meetings became the covert corridors of influence, and perhaps a place where the art of persuasion simmered like a perfect pudding. As the kitchen clock dutifully ticked towards another era, these unsung heroines of home economy continued to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, ensuring that their homes were places not just of sleep, but truly of domestic sovereignty. And so, dear listener, let us gently close the curtain on this chapter of soap bubbles and scandalous sewing circles. Let us softly drift, as if on the gentle tides of history itself, toward yet another tale, where behind every eyelid momentarily at rest lies a world of undiscovered stories waiting to be gently uncovered. As the sun dipped behind the horizon and the suburbs of 1950s, America prepared for another symphony of chirping crickets, we delve back into the world where housewives donned pearls for grocery trips and wielded rolling pins like scepters. With a house full of gadgets from a post-war boom in domestic technology, one might think that life for these ladies was all casserole recipes and bridge games. But let us tiptoe closer, to the linoleum floor where a new sort of vibration was emerging. Beneath it, a low rumble that might just be the neighborhood demise of boredom. Enter Mrs. Dorothy Dottie Livingston, a self-proclaimed defender of boring conventions who, like a secret agent whose mission was to spread intrigue, managed to develop an intriguing penchant for making bird baths out of pilfered lawn ornaments. Dottie's method was as stealthy as it was bewildering to her neighbors. She skillfully blended thievery with mid-afternoon tea, lifting garden gnomes and flamingos under the cover of neighborly chatter. It's easy to imagine Dottie, in her neatly pressed gingham, mildly tittering at the varied absences around town, shrubs inexplicably devoid of adornments. For the townsfolk, her knack for birdbath making became a hot topic, with each garden mysteriously producing a singular theme, the glaring absence of its cherished centerpiece. Her secret lay in open sight. Dottie's backyard was no garden of Eden, but rather a zoological collection where once homeless garden creatures found new habitats, transformed into finned aviaries. This was her sanctuary, her creative haven where she mused, "The robins need somewhere fancier to bathe." We wonder, what drove such peculiar pursuit? Maybe it was the stilted sameness of 1950s suburbia, or perhaps the thrill of discussing whose plaster deer had bolted during the night. As her endeavors grew, so did her quiet fame. She didn't just assemble chimeric birdbaths, she inadvertently founded a secret society of missing lawn decor aficionados. Each theft left a story, and an eager audience in its wake, a page turning without needing to be read. For Dottie, the stakes were amusingly trivial, yet the community's fervent suppositions painted her endeavors as the stuff of cozy mystery novels. Nobody imagined staid Dorothy behind such escapades. Her glasses were far too sensible, her laugh much too tinkling to suspect. She embodied the ultimate sleight of hand, an ordinary apparition orchestrating a benign crime spree, so subtly entertaining, it could lull an entire block into curiosity-induced slumber. In her heart, perhaps Dottie sought a rebellion in a world offering little but Gleam toothpaste and Betty Crocker cake mixes, a universe firmly topped with Jell-O. Her exploits, though whimsical, whispered of the 1950s undercurrent, a longing for unpredictability in circular lives. The white picket fences weren't just there to frame picturesque lives, they provided the perfect cover for unconventional crooks. But as every great story does, this too must pivot towards new secrets and sleepy confessions. The night is young, and the mysteries of still unknown 1950s house personalities await the unraveling. Let's continue our stroll through the pastel-shaded scraps of history, where another chapter of mildly scandalous serenity awaits just around the corner, enticing curiosity like a tin of freshly baked cookies. The sleepy suburb of Anywhereville, USA, where the lawns were as neatly trimmed as the husband's haircuts, and the only thing faster than the cars was the spreading of gossip. There was a society of housewives who wore their domestic duties like pearls. Yet, hidden beneath the layers of taffeta and aprons, they quietly performed acts of daring cunning that would not only provide them with an occasional adrenaline rush, but would also ignite more intrigue during the weekly coffee clutch than any soap opera of the time. One such escapade involved Mrs. Doris Finchley, who, armed with her trusty coupon book, considered almost sacred in those days, hatched a plan to beat the system of grocery store pricing. Yes, while her outward demeanor read as calmly as a Jane Austen novel, internally she was Shakespearean, plotting her savings with the gusto of a Lady Macbeth eyeing the crown. Mrs. Finchley discovered that by strategically coordinating her shopping days, she could exploit the overlapping sales at Johnson's Market and the newly opened Alfonso's Grocerama. Armed with bi-weekly schedules, she calculated with the precision of a Manhattan Project scientist. She set about stockpiling discount canned peas and striped toothpaste like provisions for a culinary apocalypse. Mrs. Finchley's exploits didn't end at groceries. There was another secret whispering between the handkerchief-laden folds of her social circle, the case of the mysteriously disappearing salon shampoo. You see, Mrs. Finchley and her friends had noticed that Mrs. Dorothy Lambert always had remarkably shiny hair, one that flowed and glistened with a radiance usually reserved for movie stars on billboards. This brilliance, Mrs. Lambert would waftingly admit, was courtesy of the salon-exclusive Crowning Glory shampoo. Determined to demystify the source, Doris, alongside her cohort of coiffure comrades, orchestrated a spy mission rivaling any Cohen-era antics. Tuesday at 2 p.m. sharp, they lay in wait across the street from posh and Polish Beauty Beach, cleverly masquerading their mission as a discussion on hydrangea recipes. As soon as Mrs. Lambert emerged, chit-chatting with the stylist, their keen eyes scanned how she coyly tucked away a bottle discreetly wrapped under the latest issue of Good Homes magazine. That evening, Doris proudly added covert operations specialist to her repertoire, having lifted the shampoo curtain not as thieves, but as investigative reporters of the upper middle class kind. However, the tale that may have woven the most laughter-induced drowsiness involved the fateful evening of the so-called Garden Club scandal. Mrs. Finchley, who was now the unofficial leader of this band of kitchen table renegades, proposed a novel idea. They would organize a fundraising garden party, more befitting a royal shindig, under the guise of neighborhood fervor for hydrangea horticulture. Herein invited were the who's who of local law, and most importantly, the somewhat oblivious husbands. Yet the mission was double-layered. The charity fund did indeed benefit the local library, but it also provided a mysterious side fund. This clandestine stash was in fact cleverly amassed to finance a ladies' weekend retreat, to to the newly christened Boca Raton seaside, where sunbathed relaxation awaited. The deception was all too simple. The women, draped in floral prints, sipped minted iced teas and lured their unsuspecting spouses into lawn game contests with subtle wagers, bets placed on horseshoe prowess, croquet wit, and cricket cunning. The evening passed with laughs as light as the evening breeze and whispers of windswept romance, none the wiser to the ladies' ulterior motive. This caper was a roaring success, akin to D.B. Cooper jumping out of his plane unscathed, though their descent into relaxation on sun-laden beaches came not from heights, but from artfully laid plans and the careful coup of aspirations. Thus, as the serene hum of crickets slowly fills the air, crafted tales of yore weave through the quiet landscape, Mrs. Finchley and friends, though ordinary in outward appearance, created a tapestry as colourful as any patchwork quilt, one that enriched both their community and their very selves. As we turn the page in this symphony of domestic secrecy, perhaps you'll dream of your own adventures waiting to be discovered, wherever bedtime's frontier may take you next. Under the soft glow of a street lamp and the gentle patter of the evening rain, Martha Reynolds executed her most devious plan yet. It was a warm June evening in 1957, and to anyone peeking out from behind their gingham curtains, nothing seemed amiss. But beneath that placid suburban veneer, Martha was about to right a wrong that seemed as big as the digits on Susie Brewster's bank statement. Now, you must understand, Martha was no criminal mastermind, but rather an aficionado of the fine art of couponing. She had mastered the ability to pay precisely nothing for more canned corn than one might find in Aunt Mabel's bomb shelter pantry. But alas, the local grocery store had conspired with gravity, elevating the price of her favorite dish soap by a scandalous 3 cents. With an air of confidence and an umbrella that hadn't quite unfolded, Martha made her way to the grocery store. Her nefarious plan, a swap so daring that even the neighborhood cats, normally uninterested in human affairs, paused mid-street to wonder at her audacity. She intended to switch the overpriced soap, not for an inferior product, heaven forbid, but for one priced, according to a previous week's circular. Truly, an economy sheist in the making. Entering the fluorescent-lit aisles, Martha donned the disguise of the distracted shopper. Armed with an oversized handbag reminiscent of Mary Poppins, she wheeled her cart with indiscriminate dedication. Just 2 aisles and a pair of meddlesome cereal boxes lay between her and the glistening glory of the dish soap shelf. The manager, Mr. Jenkins, a man whose sole expressions alternated between sleepy and sleepier, was engrossed in rearranging a display of canned pineapple, a task that required more concentration than it seemed. As Martha approached her quarry, she prepared to strike. Calmly, she extracted the higher-priced soap and clandestinely slipped the cost-effective container into her handbag, ensuring the swap left nothing but innocence on the shelf. She hummed a tune so innocently out of tune that one could almost forgive the minor commercial larceny. A finishing touch, a signature, if you will. Martha left a coupon on the shelf, a sacrificial offering to the gods of grocery markdowns. Now, one might wonder about the fledgling morality of our dear Martha's midnight mischief. Fear not, for it was merely an egalitarian act in the economic ecosystem of mid-century consumerism, a peaceful rebellion against the rising tides of inflation in a world of mushrooming Tupperware parties and socio-economic discourse around well-buttered casseroles. Having successfully executed her plan, Martha exited the store, a certain bounce in her step as she crossed paths with Doris, her nosy neighbor, and perhaps the kinder, sorter inspiration behind the operation. Doris, a bastion of neighborhood intelligence, might have turned a skeptic eye, but caught in the rain, she was more concerned with securing the endurance of her crimpline hairdo. As Martha returned home, feeling triumphant yet unaffected, she considered retiring for the evening. Her husband snoozed peacefully in front of an episode of Leave It to Beaver, paying no mind to his wife's redistributive justice. She settled into the comforting embrace of her crocheted afghan and relished the simmering contentment born from her daring adventure. But one can never fully predict the outcomes of such daring deeds. As the rain transitioned to a gentle drizzle, and the evening began its transformation into a silent surrender, Martha couldn't help but wonder if her next bold move might involve the intricate world of green stamps, or perhaps the somewhat intimidating art of wallpaper resale. Such thoughts drift pleasantly into dreams populated by pastel palettes and fashionable ovals. The night outside folded itself into the embrace of a quiet, suburban calm. The adventures of today slid seamlessly into the promise of tomorrow, and Martha found her mind swirling with the possibilities as she drifted towards slumber. Of course, the night was still young, and she would have plenty of time to plot her next escapade in the world of covert consumerism while clinging to the sweet murmur of falling rain. Picture it, a Tuesday afternoon in 1951, when respectable middle-aged women everywhere donned their favorite floral aprons and marched into battle armed with nothing but a cookbook and a wooden spoon. But perhaps the real secret weapon these housewives possessed was their uncanny ability to turn mundane suburban life into a series of comedic capers. Today, we uncover the shocking yet charmingly innocuous crime of attempting to reinvent the timeless gelatin salad. In their pursuit of domestic notoriety, 1950s housewives engaged in what might be considered high culinary treason, the reimagining of traditional recipes. You see, dinner parties weren't just occasions for socializing. They were stages where proud hostesses showcased their culinary innovations. These women, in their infinite wisdom and creativity, took the culinary rules of the past and gently placed them into the mixing bowl of modernity. The gelatin salad, a dish originally hailing from the Victorian era, was wildly popular during the 50s. It was an opportunity to use the latest kitchen appliance, the refrigerator. The ambition of these housewives knew no bounds. They molded fruits, vegetables, and an alarming array of ingredients into vivid towers of gelled courage. Betty, from Next, daughter, caught between gin rummy and gossip hour, nearly broke boundaries by integrating something no sensible person would expect to eat encased in gelatin: tuna fish. Yes, friends, tuna fish. And so became Betty's truly unrepentant deception, laid out elegantly beneath the flickering glow of the dining room chandelier. The dish sparkled with a neon hue so unnatural it was nearly radioactive, matching the shade of lipstick that was all the rage that year. As Betty revealed her pièce de résistance with a flourish, she was met with polite gasps and nervous, albeit intrigued glances among her guests. Despite the gelatin war crimes involving seafood, her audience was trapped. Social norms dictated they couldn't refuse the culinary curiosity without great embarrassment. And so, with feigned nonchalance, or possibly genuine fear, the guests gingerly scooped the quivering concoction, committing temporarily to Betty's brand of rug-wrapped rebellion. To everyone's surprise, the dish was marginally acceptable. Although the taste lingered persistently, like an unintended houseguest, nobody dared voice dissent. Pretending to enjoy it became a sign of social grace, and therefore, a miraculous crime was concealed. As was the tradition of the time, once someone succeeded, or at least didn't fail spectacularly, everyone else had to follow. Soon, neighborhoods were abuzz with tales of pineapple encased in tomato aspic, celery settled in crème de menthe, and even marshmallows paired alarmingly with ham. While dessert and mains collided, the mad cast of characters in every refrigerator insisted they were functioning within the culinary avant-garde, each brave decision as scandalously ridiculous as their weekly bridge games. One might argue, and rightly so, that gelatin salads became a symbol of suburban rebellion, a playground for those confined to chambers of Americana to make their own rules. These were rebels without a cause, except the cause was crafting the most inconceivably edible creation to impress the neighbors. As we close the fridge door on this chapter of retro culinary escapades, remember that beneath the layers of jiggly madness lay boredom's fiercest competitor: creativity. Every gelatin experiment was a cheeky nod to mischief wrapped in a guise of domestic duty, a true reflection of those daring days when Ronnie Reagan knew less about running a country and more about cattle racing in westerns. Cross yourself if you dare, as we glide stealthily towards tales even more flavorful, distant yet never forgotten, where blenders and hats collide, begging the question, just what were these housewives hiding under those chic hats? A different batch of suburban confidentials awaits, so keep your eyes on the door and your gossip ears tuned in tight, dear dreamers. In the hazy half-light of the 1950s, where the hot blush of post-war optimism intertwined with the gentle hum of suburban living, there lay little room for the extraordinary within the confines of an ordinary housewife's day. Yet, one small town, let's call it Dullsville, for irony's sake, held secrets within its gingham curtains that would shock even the most disinterested ears. Martha Jenkins, Dullsville's reigning queen of gingham, harbored a secret so scandalous that it could only be whispered in the domestic bistros of the local ladies' bridge clubs. You see, beneath her perpetually pristine apron, Martha ran an underground pie smuggling ring. The crime? Certainly not the pies themselves, which were undeniably delicious, but the pie tins, purloined from the church's annual bake sales. Each year, scores of Pyrex pie dishes went missing, like a particularly clumsy flock of pigeons. This led to a peculiar kind of labeling madness among the church ladies that historians would later refer to as the Pyrex Panic of '57. Labels everywhere, glued, stitched, in cursive inked with a hand so steady you could chart it in a geometry. In class. Martha had a penchant for blueberry and a reputation for blackberry, both of which she baked with such expertise that they might be mistaken for works of art, ensuring that anyone on her guest list became loyal followers of her flavorful cause. Yet, the truth behind her pie prowess remained as slippery as the mismatched Tupperware lids at her Tupperware parties. But why, dear listener, why pilfer pie tins in such a quaint and unassuming community? The motivation was as old as time itself: neighborhood envy. Martha's pies had won the Summer Fair Prize 3 times running, and her rivals, exemplified by Betty Pierce, whose crust was flakier than an infomercial promise, could only puff and grumble in their envious soup pots. The tins, innocently enough, were labeled with the names of her fiercest competitors. Martha's secret was at risk every time she spun tales of pie-baking prowess with a boyish energy that defied daytime boredom. An enigma and a culinary criminal rolled into one, like a perfectly timed sugar dusting over a clandestine conversation. But on one fateful summer afternoon, the jig was at risk of being up. Betty Pierce, fueled by a cocktail of determination and a suspicious absence of Thursday bingo winnings, paid an unexpected visit. She had donned her suspicious demeanor, which complemented her well-worn floral housecoat splendidly, as she canvassed Martha's kitchen with inquisitive glances sharper than her lemon zesters. As if scripted by a sleepy garden narrator, an exquisitely timed wind, unnaturally theatrical in its timing really, blew through the lace curtains as Betty's eyes landed on Martha's unique collection of pie tins, unlabeled and yet so familiar. Was this the end for Martha's majestic pie empire? But clever Martha, always quick on her feet even as the biscuits baked, delighted in the game of diversion. With a smile that rivaled the Cheshire's own, she proposed another pot of chamomile tea, brewed just so to ease Betty's tensions. Betty, caught between doubt and the promise of a perfectly brewed cup, hesitated. Seizing the moment, Martha reached for a tin within tin, a nesting doll of deceit, expertly hiding her thrilling tale of pastry piracy within the cloud of innocence that steamed refreshingly between them. Though perhaps unconventional, history remembers Martha not as a villain, but rather a white flower hero, defiant in her choice to elevate the mundane. And so, Dullsville continued, enfolded in pastry and perfumed with laughter, a place where the simple art of stealing time and tins lent the suburbs a charming glow. For what is history if not a collection of strange pie slices, each revealing its own quirky filling. As you sink deeper into the cozy embrace of your dreams, know that our tale of crime and custards wafts gently onward, weaving through the soft, doughy folds of life around a quaint corner where you may find yet again the extraordinary nestled within the ordinary. In the tranquil 1950s suburbia, where white picket fences are lined with perfection and every lawn boasted of immaculate green, a particular breed of superwoman roamed, the ordinary housewife. Armed with cakes and casseroles, dressed in immaculate aprons, and coiffed hair that defied gravity, these women were the silent backbone of domestic bliss. Their days were filled with the rhythmic symphony of a tidy home, the soft lament of evening TV shows, and whispered conversations over fence posts. However, occasionally, an undercurrent of rebellion rippled beneath the surface, subtle as the quiet hum of a Hoover vacuum cleaner. Imagine, if you will, Bertha Pinkerton, a seemingly typical housewife with a not-so-typical desire to decorate her front lawn with tulips, not just any tulips, but Mrs. Willoughby's tulips from 2 blocks over. She had coveted those vibrant reds and yellows, brightening up the Willoughby home from afar, sparking a passion she could scarcely control. In her unblemished mind, this was mere garden variety creative borrowing. So one misty morning, during the precious hour between breakfast and the Blitz, an intense shuffleboard rendezvous at the community centre, Bertha slipped quietly along the neighbourhood lane, armed with trowel and basket, her heart pounding faster than Frank Sinatra could croon. Now, if one were to consider this a crime, one might start down the philosophical rabbit hole of horticultural larceny and the great tulip controversies of the 17th century, a time when the Dutch would have likely swooned at Bertha's audacity. But this was not Holland nor the golden age of tulips. It was mid-century Americana, where scandals were weighed in teaspoons of mischief. Bertha's tulip escapade, however minor, soon blossomed into suburbia's whispered legend. The tale blew through community book clubs faster than the newest Jacqueline Suzanne novel, transforming Bertha into a peculiar heroine amidst ordinary housewives. As whispers of her adventure spread, gentlemen with newspapers under arms and ladies in mid-afternoon tea spoke of her daring, almost as if she were an Amazon of yore, not lifting artifacts, but embarking on a cross-floral conquest. Yet Bertha was not alone in her pursuits. The 1950s spawned countless such delightful household dramas. There was Margaret, the deviously delightful neighbour, whose culinary curiosity led her to steal sugar packets from the local diner, believing it to be the secret ingredient missing from her famed lemon squares, a confection so tart it could curl a cat's whiskers from 2 houses away. And who could forget Eloise Thompson's penmanship scandal? Eloise wrote letters to the Italic department store, demanding free samples for her famed persona of Duchess of Whippleton, resulting in an avalanche of creams and balms with royal labels. Little did the department store know their Duchess reigned over mere blocks of tidy suburban pavement. As evenings turned to eves, each housewife's tale grew drowsier under the warm glow of sitcom reruns. Indeed, it was in these moments, between soap operas and snoring spouses, that dreams of small rebellions flickered into existence, only to dissolve with morning's coffee. Yet these crimes, innocuous as they were, cemented a bond between the muffin munchers and casserole crafters of the time. They turned chores and trivial rivalries into legends worthy of bedtime stories. So tonight, as you lie tucked under layers of comfort and nostalgia, allowing the soft laughter of Beatles' records echoing through time, let us drift along to the notion that even in rhythmically predictable eras, some sought color beyond the lines, daring to dream beyond the afternoon nap. Allow yourself the serenity to slip further into this narrative bliss, knowing another tale awaits, weaving through the threads of ordinary days and nights, shaping the sleepy tapestry of whispered history. Imagine, if you will, the suburbia of the 1950s, a place simultaneously filled with predictability and mystery. The soundtrack is the gentle hum of lawnmowers and the clatter of typewriters tapping out PTA newsletters, a time of pastel-colored tranquility perhaps. But beneath that placid surface lay tales far less ordinary. Stories that would leave even the most seasoned noir detective scratching his hatted head. Ah, mid-century America. It was the golden era of remarkable scandals, or what passed for scandal back then, when leaving the house in rollers merited a neighborhood meeting. But today, dear listener, we tiptoe into the tantalizing world of kitchen espionage and closet conspiracies. And precisely at this crossroad of extraordinary and everyday, we find Miriam Peabody, homemaker, extraordinaire, and secret supplier of neighborhood gossip, her craft honed over years of artful eavesdropping while pruning her azaleas. Miriam had a keen interest in her neighbors, much like how bees have an interest, in honey. She greeted you with an apple pie and left you with a lingering suspicion that she knew just how late you came home last night. But Miriam had a more impressive skill up her floral sleeves. She was a self-taught sleuth, consecutively crowned champion in the neighborhood's annual mystery-solving bake-offs. Word spread faster than butter on a hot griddle of her unparalleled ability to unmask the culprit behind last week's borrowed rake incident. Now, our protagonist was not only a curious soul, she was equipped with a detective's toolkit that consisted, as every seasoned housewife detective knows, of a pair of garden shears, a notebook disguised as a vintage cookbook, and an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's laundry days. But her true prowess was in her knack for recognizing the nuances in Betty Henderson's slightly nervous pie crust cutting technique and the uncharacteristic shine of Mary Lou's newly polished Buick. It was on one particularly cloudy afternoon, as rain threatened but never quite delivered, that Miriam's heart raced, not from overindulgence in caffeine-free hot cocoa, mind you, but from the thrill of a fresh mystery unraveling on Maple Street. Rumor had it, if rumors ever had it any other way than the most tangled, it appeared that someone had been sneaking into garages and rearranging power tools by size, which, in the rigidly organized world of 1950s suburbia, was akin to rearranging stars in the sky. As you can imagine, this was a puzzle far too enticing for Miriam to resist. Swirls of thought danced through her mind like ghosts at a cotillion. Who among the cardigan-clad could be plotting such garage choreography? She donned her rain slicker and ventured forth, notebook in hand, though it might rain lemon meringue pies for all she cared. Her first call was at the Petersons' shed, where she noted that the wrenches were indeed in suspiciously logical alignment. The tension in the shed was palpable, or it might have been the scent of expertly aged fertilizers. With the disarming ease of a favorite aunt asking about your sock drawer, Miriam probed the neighbors about their weekend activities, discreetly gleaning vital information about who borrowed whose mower and why Eddie Snyder seemed so pleased with his freshly sheared hedge. As her detective rounds continued, with deft hands flipping sluice after sluice of suburban secrets, Miriam found herself at the door of the least likely suspect of all, Mildred Simmons. Known for her penchant for unmatched socks and misaligned picture frames, Mildred, it seemed, had been a mechanical organization savant all along. Who would have thought? Mildred, with her scattershot methods and endearing knack for mismatched anything, had been playing a long game of neighborhood improvement, albeit unsolicited and under the cover of moonlight. With her usual grace, Miriam handled the revelation. Mildred's secret passion was a sort of ill-founded altruism, planning garage interventions as though conducting symphonies amid the suburban clamor. Together, they laughed about the whole affair, exchanging knowing winks and trotting back into the amiable suspense of everyday life. And so it was. Another chapter in the whimsical annals of the extraordinary ordinary concluded, with Miriam retreating to her kitchen, satisfied and ever inquisitive, the distant rumble of gossip still echoing through the quiet streets, a gentle reminder of life's endless possibilities, where even power tools may conspire to unite a sleepy community under one starched and perfectly ironed flag of civilized mystery. Now settle in as this evening's tales draw their soft veil over us, whisperingly inviting you deeper into the imaginings of another tale somewhere around the corner. In the hushed tones of post-war suburbia, a peculiar undercurrent hummed beneath the well-trimmed lawns and pastel-colored homes. The 1950s was allegedly a time of perfection and dreams, when housewives donned their finest pearls to vacuum and flipped flapjacks while practicing perfect posture. But if history has taught us anything, it's that appearances, much like a last-minute homemade casserole, can be deceiving. Enter the world of Alice Tiddlywink, certainly not the name her neighbors knew her by. To them, she was simply Mrs. Henderson, an average housewife of Grand Rapids, Michigan, avid bridge player, and porcupine of gossip night at the local community center. But beneath her floral apron, Alice harbored a secret that kept her neighbors buzzing like bees around a suspiciously sweet honeysuckle bush. Alice, you see, was the notorious mastermind behind the Great Pie Caper of 1953. While her criminal undertakings didn't make the papers, and J. Edgar Hoover certainly didn't put her on his real threats list within her tidy cul-de-sac, her tale was folklore. The adventure began innocently enough during the Andersons' annual block party, a polite affair involving severely overcooked hot dogs and lemonade potent enough to scrub barnacles off a pier. It was during this convivial gathering that Alice overheard Mrs. Wilkins, the reigning queen of the pie competition, boasting about her unbeatable blueberry creation. Never one to let a challenge slip by, Alice hatched a whimsical plan as mischievous as a cat burglar slipping into a fishery. Under the cover of moonlight, armed with her wits and an apron full of strategy, Alice struck with precision. She had calculated the Wilkins family schedule down to the second. After all, they were as predictable as a 1950s sitcom plot twist. Her method was simple yet effective, a distraction involving Mittens, the feisty neighborhood cat, and a borrowed garden gnome that inexplicably found itself on the Wilkins porch, staring down local onlookers with the stoicism of a Roman statue. As the Wilkins family attempted an impromptu intervention for the out-of-place ornament, Alice swooped in like a folklore robin. If robins were known for swapping baked goods instead of depositing dew on roses, with a lightness of foot any tap dancer would envy, she made her swap. While the Wilkins dealt with the gnome dilemma, her hands worked like a pianist composing silent symphonies in the night, switching her carefully planned blueberry creation with the Grand Wilkins pie. By the dawn's early light, the pie competition commenced amidst a chorus of compliments, voices like wind chimes on a soft April morning. Alice, with an air as nonchalant as toast, entered her entry last, savoring the anticipation. Unsurprisingly, or perhaps unbelievably, Mrs. Wilkins sliced into her pie, only to find it wasn't quite her finest hour. The flavor, although divine, seemed eerily different. Meanwhile, Alice maintained her poker face, a facial arrangement she had perfected through years of surviving PTA meetings. Of course, Alice didn't envision the aftermath of her genial larceny. The following day, the Andersons reveled in their surprise victory, while Mrs. Wilkins attempted to retrace her pie steps. Eventually, an accidental confession creeped out during a game of bridge. Alice let it slip to her partner when a particularly tense hand was met with more trumps than even Julius Caesar might have handled. But here, dear listener, is the real twist. Rather than outrage, it seemed the neighborhood was secretly elated by Alice's harmless hijinks. For while pie accolades were tempting, what everyone had truly craved was a slice of unexpected adventure, a reminder that even amidst the ordered houses, curiosity and playfulness stirred. In the spirit of unity over competition, a new tradition was born. Each year, the entire neighborhood now partakes in what they dubbed the Pie Exchange, where everyone vows to undertake a little cheeky devilry, all in the name of camaraderie and sugared crusts. As we gently close the lid on this chapter, imagine Alice sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by her pie swaps and beloved stories, preparing her next culinary caper. For in this sleepy little street, the echoes of laughter rang long into the night, weaving tales like delicate lace on quaint tablecloths, dreaming of the new adventures still to come. As the evening moonlight kissed the rooftops once more, things grew softer still, a hush after the whimsy as we step quietly onward. Picture it, the vibrant mid-century glow of the 1950s. The world was recovering from war, and America was easing into an era of optimism and prosperity. A time marked by malt shops, sock hops, and homemakers quietly orchestrating their intricate suburban symphonies. But beneath their immaculate aprons and perfectly coiffed hairstyles, some housewives were orchestrating other kinds of intriguing notes. Enter Mildred Hawthorne, possessor of a look that screamed apple pie cooling on a windowsill, and yet was as mischief-minded as a raccoon on laundry day. A quintessential 1950s housewife who would scurry through the supermarket aisles, not with lists of groceries, but agendas of espionage. Yes, Mildred was more familiar with cloak and dagger activities than baking soda substitutions. In those days, neighborhood bridges were often constructed over exchange fences, with gossip riveting them together like architectural beams. And Mildred knew the strength of such bridges well, using her friendly chats to gather neighborhood intelligence, much like a cheerful squirrel collecting acorns. Her prized possession wasn't, as you might suspect, heirloom china, but rather a discreet pair of binoculars, jokingly said to be for birdwatching but rather more often aimed at the mysterious goings-on at number 37 Elm Street. Mildred's choir had a particularly interesting highlight every Wednesday when the local book club convened. Of course, any forthright association assumes literature discussion, yet little reading happened amidst the whispered pages of Agnes's living room. They prattled about something far more riveting, gardening tips with a side of espionage. Passé top-secret stateside matters that had Mildred leading a network more intricately woven than any knitting pattern she'd ever encountered. As history reveals, these lovely domestic divas played their parts impeccably. Mildred, for instance, reveled in innocuous tea parties, treating the affair as practice for her espionage inclinations. With delicate ease, she'd borrow sugar, the newest recipe for pineapple upside-down cake, and state secrets. Because what's a little state secret swap between friends? Meanwhile, Mildred's ally, Doris, carried her espionage contributions tucked beneath fashionably clad sleeves. Her espionage scholarship was, it should be said, unmatched among the cucumber sandwich set. Doris was expert in penetrating levels of bureaucracy rumored to exist behind the drawn curtains of Patriot games, all while sporting perfectly ironed dresses, never a wrinkle betraying her clandestine ambitions. Yet these household spies, it turned out, also had elements of delightful irony woven into their tales. Take Mildred's penchant for sending her husband off with dossiers tucked surreptitiously within his lunches, hidden behind Wonder Bread as he cluelessly left for his desk job, pondering more about his office foe than the confidential files slipping out with his chips. The husbands, blissfully unaware, played their roles to comedic perfection. What would Fred Hawthorne think had he realized that the folding chairs skewed at their picnic weren't due to his shoddy assembling, but rather adjusted to accommodate radio transistor eavesdropping stations configured and retracted by Mildred with elegant precision? Amidst the dreamy, lazy summer afternoons, their escapades bore an air of gentle absurdity. Mildred maneuvered her complexities as deftly as she tended to her rose bushes, ensuring her blooms escaped neither complacency nor aphid interference. The subtle signs of espionage mirrored the care she took in her domestic duties, sterling silver polished to brilliant shine, and in her planner, secret notations inked amidst grocery lists and bridge scores. As our eyes grow heavy and minds drift in the ethereal, we leave Mildred in her meticulous haven, the occasional rustle of her apron lessening to a whisper. Indeed, what were crimes of 1950s housewives but charming acts of rebellion, wrapped in humor and tales, donning the invisibility cloak of history? Rest, dear listener, as this chapter closes. Prepare to open your eyes when next you do, elsewhere in this sleepy saga of subversive, suburban intrigue. As the humdrum jazz of the 1950s played in the background, filtered through the crackling speakers of a radio on a kitchen counter, one could almost imagine the reassuring words of an anchorman describing housewives of the era with phrases like domestic goddesses, or suburban supremos. Yet, hidden beneath the surface of this perceived calm and order, some housewives were not just busy, knitting socks or perfecting meatloaf recipes. Oh no, some were cheerfully plotting schemes that might make modern caper movies blush. Meet Beverly Berridge, affectionately known as the Cupcake Queen of Bloomfield Drive. A lady who could whip up an angel food cake faster than you could say Betty Crocker. Mrs. Berridge had a particular penchant for hosting afternoon teas that were the talk and occasional tabloid of the neighborhood. But Beverly had a secret involving a peculiar crime spree that puzzled local authorities, the Great Petunia Patch Pilferage. By day, she shared the perfect recipe for lemon squares. By night, well, more accurately, dusk, when the other housewives were engrossed in the latest radio serials, Mrs. Berridge would slip into a pair of garden gloves and make her way to the nearby community garden. Now, you may ask yourself, why would a respectable housewife borrow petunias from the local garden? It's not as if these flowers could make her floats any floatier or her pies any pier. The written answer to this fragrant filching lay hidden in the growth of her own backyard flower bed, which miraculously won the coveted neighborhood Flora Trophy 3 years in a row. Each newly acquired bloom fed her competitive spirit, much to the puzzlement of her green-thumbed competitors. On one particularly daring evening, Beverly decided to up the ante, or rather, up the petunia, to tulips. Her motivation, some speculated, stemmed from an ongoing rivalry with a neighbor who had begun to cultivate an impressive collection of these dignified flowers. Cloaked in the early evening mist, she tiptoed, bypassing the protesting creaks of the wrought-iron gate at the far end of the garden. When lo and behold, she paused to witness a fellow pilferer in the act, Mrs. Whistlebottom herself. The unexpected deviser of posies froze. So did the suspected mini hyacinth heister. In a neighborhood not famed for its secrets, 2 housewives stood in silence, a bouquet of tulips and a bouquet of suspense between them. Then, like a duo from I Love Lucy, they both chuckled, as if the comedy of coincidence would absolve them of all guilt. They came to a classic suburban agreement, each in on the other's floral faux pas, mutual silence, a brilliance worthy of the Cold War diplomatic masters of the era. Beverly and Mrs. Whistlebottom would now form a secret botanical alliance. The flowers in their respective gardens flourished like never before. Days were filled with flower beds' vibrant hues, nights with whispered laughs about the Great Petunia Patch Pilferage, as they privately referred to their escapade. Unbeknownst to them, their antics had inspired a flurry of local gossip that framed their capers as potential antics of a flower-fancying ghost, or perhaps a garden gnome gone bad, both explanations fantastical enough to befit a neighborhood adept at tall tales. Yet even this continual speculation only served to make both housewives silently chuckle into their not-so-innocent teacups. As spring wore on and their neighbors marveled at their seemingly mystical talents for growing flowers, Beverly and her trusty tulip accomplice lived as innocuously as ever, planting seeds of camaraderie alongside their blooms. In a way, their peculiar pastime became an undercurrent of understanding that stretched beyond roses and rhododendrons, binding the 2 women with an unspoken pact that even the snazziest floral arrangement couldn't unfurl. With evening hours now shrouded in another of their secret rendezvous, this peculiar sisterhood continued in the quiet solitude of their suburban Eden, perfectly content to chuckle quietly at the irony that within this ordinary setting, ordinary homemakers had become legends in their own right. And so, dear listener, as the next chapter in our suburban escapade approaches, let your thoughts meander through blooms of lavender dreams, perhaps finding solace in the charming chaos that sometimes accompanies even the humblest of lives. The curtain rises on the quaint tableau of the 1950s suburbia, where every blade of grass is trimmed with military precision and every white picket fence stands as a beacon of conformity. Yet lurking beneath this serene facade are the tales of housewives whose daring escapades can only be described as mildly rebellious. Enter the world of Betty Lou Jenkins, a woman whose crime is so brazenly ordinary that it deserves its own detective novel. Betty Lou, a stereotypical housewife during the Eisenhower era, has a vice deemed raucous by the etiquette guidebooks of the time. She is a chronic returnee of Tupperware parties. While the spectacle of ladies gathered in living rooms, admiring plastic containers, might seem benign to us today, Betty Lou turned it into an art form of mischief. Our plot thickens when Betty Lou, armed with a killer smile and the guile of an overly caffeinated chess player, managed to become the bane of every Tupperware hostess in the tri-state area. She possessed an uncanny ability to waltz into each gathering, knowingly purchase an array of burping bowls, only to reverse the entire transaction the following week, citing inexplicable buyer's remorse. But here is where Betty's genius lay. She was harvesting gossip like a farmer gathers corn. Her returns were tactical, ensuring she visited multiple parties each month, gleaning the secrets of her neighbors, piecing together a social tapestry under the guise of buyer's inquiry. Add a dash of mint julep, and the whispers of Wayward Avenue became her personal sitcom without the need for a television set. On a particularly drowsy Wednesday, one of those dreamy afternoons where the sun bathes everything in a sepia hue, Betty found herself at the McFeeters' party. This time, things went awry when she blurted out to one Mrs. Mayflower about the scandalous amount of flour found in a neighbor's garage, which incidentally wasn't used for baking. Flour, it turned out, was the code for something not quite legal in the local PTA lexicon. Meanwhile, Betty's husband, Hank Jenkins, was oblivious to his wife's sordid shopping expeditions, all thanks to those double-agent martinis Betty swiftly shook up nightly. Hank, caught in his own web of mundane dramas, namely avoiding the backyard BBQ invitations of Carl from accounting, found solace in Betty's exceptional roast beef. Little did he know that Betty's true flavors lay in thrilling tales of coupon espionage and secrets swapped over deviled eggs. Though Betty Lou's antics might appear innocent today, back then, any deviation from the expected norm was tantamount to societal treason. As the sun settled, leaving a gentle chill in the air and a pastel sky above, Betty contemplated which dessert would pair best with next week's tale of Dawson. Ford's suspiciously frequent trips to the Jewel supermarket, perhaps pie with a hint of cinnamon intrigue. Die-hard devotees of suburbia drama might never know the joy of Betty Lou's housewife capers. But you, dear listener, armed with your freshly plumped pillow and dreams orchestrated by her gentle schemes, are now privy to the art of Tupperware intrigue and suburban sleuthing. As you're lulled into the embrace of sleep, let your mind wander dreamily to the quiet streets of 1950s America, where fences were white, lives appeared neat, and beneath the shiny surface of daily monotony, housewives like Betty Lou were crafting tales richer than any scripted drama. Rest easy, for the evening air carries with it the soft whispers of curiosity and gentle chuckles, tidily wrapped in an era of mid-century misadventures. Now, as the outside world gently fades, we'll leave Betty Lou's quaint escapades to unravel further, sparking intrigue in neighborhoods just like yours. With the warmth of a knowing grin, the story will soon beckon us to explore the charmingly clandestine corners of another housewife's domain. But until then, allow your dreams to nestle comfortably in these softly swaying meadows of historical mischief. Picture, if you will, a dust-dappled afternoon in 1956. The sun lazily drapes itself across the suburban streets like a worn blanket splashed with pale pastels. Bellflower Road was a place where nothing remarkable ever happened. That is, until Margie Applegate's curiosity eluded her as she attempted to bake Austrian Linzer cookies. In this nostalgic boudoir of unsolved mysteries, suspicious pavlova recipes abounded, and the women of the neighborhood preened themselves with a dedication that suggested something secretive was always simmering beneath the surface. Margie, with the radiant charm of a woman who had just watched her favorite soap opera triumphantly conclude, was known for her exceptional ability to jiggle information out of the most tight-lipped residents. Her probing inquiries might be mistaken for benign chit-chat, but she was known in those circles as the Bermuda Triangle of tea. Anything you told her had been thoroughly dissected and never seen again. Our story growls its gentle engine as Margie, sniffing a faint scent of intrigue, decided to swap baking tips with Mrs. Pennyweather, her punctual neighbor who, it was whispered, harbored a flair for the theatrical and slightly illegal. Mrs. Pennyweather, who wore her pearls with the same confidence as a detective wore his badge, was allegedly the local high priestess of underground poker nights. These clandestine card soirees were the housewives' gambit against the unrelenting humdrum existence of sandwich making and sock mending. On that sunny afternoon, while discussing the merits of sifting flour twice versus thrice, Margie leaned in with all the subtlety of a mime in a library, her voice dropping to a velvet whisper. "I hear you host quite the shindig every third Tuesday of the month, Phyllis," she conjectured, eyes twinkling with the thrill of potential scandal. Phyllis Pennyweather, unflappable as ever, returned Margie's probing gaze with a look that could only be described as a cat admiring the manager of a mouse circus. "Well, you know, even Mrs. O'Malley's begonias need a little lively conversation now and again," she quipped, her lips curving into a soft, mysterious smile. Word, as it tends to do when unraveled in a tapestry of nylons and amusing secrets, spread like the smell of fresh bread on a chilly morning. Soon, other residents on Bellflower Road were gathering their wits, and more importantly, their pennies. And believe me, there were quite a few husbands who raised eyebrows as their hard-earned, rainy day cash had seemingly evaporated into thin air. The plot, as it so often does when improper ingredients are mixed, rapidly thickened. Mrs. Pennyweather's saloon got wind of more than fortunes lost. Enter Angie, a trendy young housewife whose chic snapback skirts and eloquent gibberish were said to be of Parisian descent. Angie, possessing a suspiciously extensive knowledge of codes and ciphers, skills allegedly honed while selling bonds during the war, claimed to know of a secret letter that would expose the true beneficiary of the neighborhood's winnings. Between card games, closet confessions, and clandestine coffee clutches, this awfully delightful riddle of outlandish proportions took center stage. The wives fashioned themselves as clever sleuths of detective fiction, tiptoeing through cobblestone alleys of conjecture with magnifying glasses in one hand and lipstick in the other, lest any man unveil their ever-thickening plot. Amongst their chatter, Margie Applegate, who never met a secret she couldn't mildly exaggerate, vowed to unearth the truth while trying not to ruin her soufflés. After all, she mused, sipping her coup de champagne absent-mindedly, a little scandal, and never hurt the soufflé of life. And so, as the sun dipped slowly behind the suburban envelope of horizon where pastel dreams mingled with giggling shadows, these extraordinary 1950s housewives carried on in their merry cloaks of slight misdemeanors and gloriously absurd conundrums. As you imagine yourself weaving into the twilight of suburban secrets, drifting on the stories spun by those who sipped sherry, stay poised on the cusp of what peculiar revelations these buoyant histories may yet divulge. By the time the mid-1950s rolled around, the world was mostly convinced that all a housewife truly desired was a shiny new toaster and some vacuum cleaner-induced euphoria. But beneath the pearly smiles and immaculately coiffed hair, some were orchestrating their own revolutions. Picture this. The scene is an unassuming suburban neighborhood, with homes like pastel-colored soldiers lined in perfect formation. Yet, unbeknownst to most, lurking behind one of these quaint facades was a gathering spot for a renegade book club. This particular club put a cheeky spin on the term literary circle, as it secretly focused on reading and discussing then-banned books. Indeed, the risque works of D.H. Lawrence and the philosophical musings of Jean-Paul Sartre were whispered about between sips of Darjeeling. Instead of going cuckoo over casserole recipes, these ladies were essentially orchestrating a quiet, societal mutiny, disguised as errant afternoons with Shakespeare, or so they led others to believe. It all started with Mabel Trumbleton, a seemingly average housewife with a penchant for knitting pithy critiques of modern consumerism into her husband's socks. Mabel had gathered her motley crew under the guise of discussing the latest bestsellers, but as their interest veered toward those forbidden tomes, the book club morphed into a portal for existential rebelliousness. And so, what of it? Were our rogue readers truly criminals? Well, in the eyes of 1950s propriety, they were as subversive as it got. Think mild-mannered anarchists who moonlighted as avant-garde bookworms. Meanwhile, down the street, Eleanor Nellie Finkelbottom plotted her own daily escapade, perfecting the art of playing hooky from housework. Imagine a beautifully sunny day when Nellie decided to sink her newly manicured nails into something scandalously novel, like a sturdy shovel, to tunnel her way beneath the expectations of laundry day. Yes, that's right. Not only did she escape the perils of perpetually pristine upholstery, she founded what became known as the Underground Housewives Alliance. Their mission? Ditch the iron for the garden and swap dusters for daffodils without a trail of guilt. The audacity! Soon enough, an entire squadron of apron-clad renegades was gleefully co-opting afternoons to dig, plant, and cultivate until rosy-cheeked and ecstatic. Somehow, vegetable gardens sprouted chaotically alongside rose beds, leaving nosy neighbors pondering whether a new horticultural trend had taken root, or just how much thawed chicken could contribute to a clandestine tomato yield. Nellie, the pioneer spade-spinning chef, thus revolutionized homebound monotony by cultivating freedom one rutabaga at a time. Now, although the vegetables were certainly abundant, so too were the whispers of dissent from disgruntled grocery store managers who lamented their dwindling cabbage purview. Mabel, Eleanor, and their cohorts, with no extreme sports to speak of but an overflowing sauciness of intent, gradually rewrote the mundane scripts of their lives, and in doing so, fueled communal kitchens with gossip-worthy rumors. With these revolutionary acts of library and lettuce-based liberation in motion, one might wonder where all this performative rebellion left the menfolk. Fear not, for they were never the wiser, busily catching up on heavy-handed novels like How to Be an Effective Middle Manager or The Definitive Guide to Spectating on Suburbia, and our leading ladies, charming and audacious, continued to swap subversive tales over simmering casseroles, undetected by the radar of ordinary household chatter. While the ladies' minds simmered with more novels and notions of liberty than any casserole, they'd likely never have guessed that future generations might revere them as footnote architects of social innovation, wrapped neatly in polka-dotted bows, cloaked in cheerful femage. And so, dear listener, let us leave these winsome housewives amidst their clandestine pursuits, wherein their seemingly ordinary decisions brim with bursts of quiet defiance and wit. As the sun begins to melt into the horizon, like butter over Nellie's clandestinely grown corn, we tiptoe silently onwards. For there lies more to uncover beyond the hum of suburbia. Cozy into your sheets and embrace the serene tranquility as another chapter beckons just around the corner. With any luck, you'll find yourself both dreaming and pondering the eccentric endeavors left to unfold. The spring of 1957 was like a hazy pastel dream, gently unfurling in the suburbs of America, a place where the lawns were manicured and the hedges were as stiff as Uncle Fred after a confusing ballet recital. Here in the heart of post-war domesticity, a housewife named Margaret found herself coaxed into the shadowy corners of notoriety. Margaret didn't wear her hair in rollers or don an apron for her husband's return from work, like the usual stereotype. No, Margaret had her sights set on something far more revolutionary, or perhaps just revolting, depending on whose cocktail party you asked. Margaret considered herself somewhat of an inadvertent Picasso at the finger painting that was espionage. She was recruited by a group of renegade women, the Cupcake Conspiracy, a name as sweet as deceit itself. This assembled cohort of cocoa wielders, armed with recipe cards sharp enough to slice through societal norms, dedicated themselves to pilfering recipes from neighborhood bake-offs. The audacity, the scandal. It was a world where cinnamon buns were precious gems, and only the bravest souls dared dip their fingers in the sugary currents of competitive baking. Naturally, it wasn't all about the cakes and pies. These culinary saboteurs had once pilfered government weather data in the guise of a particularly stormy cherry pie filling recipe. They never admitted to meddling in climate affairs, but Dorothy, from 3 streets over, always said her bunions could predict rain better than the weatherman proper, so who could really say? One would think that such a scandalous operation would be doomed to crumble, but Margaret loved nothing more than a dough that could defy gravity. Or the FBI, for that matter. She was the kind of woman who, with a twinkle in her eye, could mislabel her sugar canister as salt just to teach herself the importance of order. And now, under an invisible apron of rebellion, her every bun was espionage. Her every tart a triumph of culinary deceit. Some accounts suggest Margaret ran the operation from her basement in a place that hovered between the scent of freshly baked goods and government paranoia. It was the sort of setting where a casual gathering was often mistaken for an unofficial UN dinner, given the cul-de-sac diversity of her socio-political test kitchen. Rumors buzzed and swirled like an over-whipped meringue. Did Margaret, in a fit of buttermilk-fueled defiance, subvert a national bake-off to conceal secret messages within the layers of her sponge cake? It's said she once used a honey glaze to encrypt an entire B-movie plotline into minute, nearly illegible hieroglyphics. Even the most diligent of husbands took several bites before noticing anything unusual. That's perhaps why they always frowned so thoughtfully over their plate. But Margaret's true crime went beyond flour and sugar. It was the crime of camaraderie, of forming a tight-knit community under the guise of friendly neighborhood gatherings where conspiracies were kneaded into every dough. While the rest of the world was busy staring at Sputnik, Margaret was launching a covert mission of her own. The unification of underappreciated housewives through the power and potential of what historians would later dub the original power brunch. Margaret's escapades were far more silly than serious. While the authorities did eventually catch wind of her not-so-nefarious escapades, they found themselves smiling as they closed the case, for nothing truly warms the heart like understanding another person's curious cooking habits. The outcome was as anticlimactic as a souffle. A few folks were none the wiser, while others raised a glass of milk in a salute to the quietly rebellious heart of suburbia. Ah, Margaret, a true sleeper agent of domestic revolution. You remind us that the 1950s were more than nylon suburbs and Levittown lanes. They were the breeding ground for unexpected narratives, ones that spun tales as lofty as a well-risen loaf of bread. And now, dear listener, as we let Margaret's flour-dusted tale gently settle under your drowsy eyelids, let's drift on to the next chapter, where the evening whispers of the past await with a subtly spiced adventure all their own. As the pastel hues of a 1950s kitchen dimmed into the comforting glow of a mid-century lamp, we find ourselves once again contemplating the audacious antics of ordinary housewives who embarked on less than ordinary escapades. On this evening, let's unravel the woolen threads of Betty from Boise, whose quiet scandal bubbled beneath her immaculately coiffed exterior like an unexpected splash of bourbon in a cookie recipe. Betty was, by all outward appearances, the embodiment of Eisenhower-era propriety. Her cherry pies were legendary at the church bake sales, lovingly latticed with the precision only years of practice could bestow. But beneath the warm aroma of cinnamon and sugar lay a secret ingredient that bore no resemblance to anything edible: bribery. You see, Betty had devised a cunning plan to up her husband's social standing in their quaint community by, sweet-talking the right people with her confections. Enter Wilson Archibald, the neighborhood watch captain, who, perhaps a tad too enthusiastically, ended up with one too many pies each week. These, of course, came with a side of chit-chat, some gentle nudges about her husband Bob's striking resemblance to someone who would look quite dashing in a city councilman's vest. Little did the community know that the true campaign trail was paved with crumbs and crust. Surprisingly, Betty's husband Bob possessed all the charisma of a damp dish rag. His pastime, collecting stamps, had yet to spark any riveting discussions at local gatherings. But where Bob's charm was, shall we say, dormant, Betty's resourcefulness flourished. Like a puppeteer with a penchant for lemon tartlets, she maneuvered social strings with a bit of sugar and stealth. One day, while sipping on her neighbor Edith's tepid tea, Betty noticed the back of her recipe card had turned into a makeshift ballot box of scribbles and tallies. This seemingly innocuous doodling became a veritable treasure map, leading to the curious tale of the block party brawl of '57, a story which itself deserves its own bedtime chapter some other night. As Betty's influence grew, largely unbeknownst to Bob, the citizens of Boise found themselves inexplicably drawn to Bob's modest speeches, finding him refreshingly understated, which, in the realm of political fare, is quite like praising boiled cabbage for its subtlety. Betty's clandestine campaign and its pie bribery became the stuff of local legend, with whispers over fences and chuckles over cards, immortalizing her unusual path to success. There's a certain elegance in Betty's strategy, a simplicity as clever as it was improbable. With every pie baked and every social circle, if she touched by her culinary cunning, she not only altered the course of her little corner of the world, but did so with a warmth and humor that softened even the hardest crusts of skepticism. Our story unfolds in the quiet moments between Betty's subtly furrowed brow as she adjusted her oven timer, ensuring her influence baked evenly into every slice. It was here, amid the interplay of dough and determination, where Betty transformed simple domesticity into a quiet revolution. No feathers were ruffled, and no flour was spilled, unless you count the one incident at the Women's Club spring luncheon. But we digress. As the final chapter of Betty's culinary coup nears its dusk, we leave her poised with a winning smile and a pie cooling on the sill, a subtle symphony of domestic power play that would, though perhaps with a touch more flair, even do Machiavelli proud. And so, dear listener, as you drift toward slumber, consider the art of Betty's gentle subterfuge, her pies a peace offering, her kitchen a war room, and her laughter echoing softly through the calm veil of night, whispering of more tales yet to be woven by the flickering hearth of history. Ease back and let the vintage sweetness wash over you, knowing that between the folds of sleep-ready sheets, more secrets of suburbia patiently await your dreams. And so, dear listeners, we find ourselves in the final chapter of our serene stroll through the whirlwind world of 1950s housewives with rather intriguing hobbies. As the curtain falls, we'll peek into the life of Harriet Snickerdoodle, a woman who orchestrated her small-town social calendar with the meticulous precision of a symphony conductor. Known for her delicious array of cookie recipes and competitive bridge playing, Harriet had a secret identity. She was the puppeteer of Prankville. In the comforting hum of post-war America, the sound of bright laughter often punctuated the air when Harriet was nearby, for she had a knack for turning the mundane into the mischievously memorable. Her greatest pride was the extravagant prank marathon she secretly organized every spring, a week-long series of shenanigans known only as Operation Giggle. It was, of course, all anonymous, and Harriet never directly claimed credit. Rather, she reveled in the whispers of mystery that followed the event. Now, Operation Giggle was no simple affair. Harriet planned it with the complexity of a military campaign. Colored soap that dyed the hands at Bridge Club, swapped street signs that sent unsuspecting postal workers in existential loops, and strategically placed whoopee cushions which caused giggles to ripple like tiny, joyful tsunamis. Her favorite, however, was the year she convinced people that a fortune-telling goldfish had moved into town. George the fish allegedly predicted several rainfalls and at least one engagement, causing a spike in goldfish sales and a sudden, inexplicable interest in aquariums. The beauty of these pranks was their pure-hearted intent. Harriet's aim was community bonding through humor. It wasn't the punchline she was after, but the creation of stories that would warm hearts for years to come. It was this seemingly small impact, the lightening of spirits in her ordinary neighborhood, that gave Harriet her secret superhero status. Beyond the giggles, there was another layer to Harriet's playful puzzle, a delightful sense of nostalgia. She was something of a relic, a gentle reminder that the childlike spirit of fun need not be left behind with the toils of adulthood. Her pranks, with their innocence and lack of harm, subtly reinforced connections among the townsfolk who might have otherwise drifted apart during their daily routines. Now, it's important to recognize Harriet wasn't America's only covert conjurer of smiles. Communities across the nation were sprinkled with such women who embraced the opportunity to transform the everyday into the extraordinary. There was Edna, the unofficial mayor of Mayhem Avenue, who once orchestrated a perfectly synchronized clap in the middle of church just to see the pastor raise an eyebrow with bemused surprise. Or Betty Lou, who famously ran a telephone chain that included speaking in funny accents just to spark a chuckle. Collectively, these women shared an unsung solidarity, a sisterhood of mischief, if you will. As we drift towards the gentle end of our story, one might wonder where all the Harriet snickerdoodles of today have gone. Perhaps some are masked beneath the daily hum of modernity, quietly sowing joy through subtle acts of kindness and quirky humor. Or maybe, just maybe, they're resting in the collective memory, urging us all to peel back the layers of our own adult exteriors, just enough to let the light-hearted spirit of the past flicker through. And so, in closing, may the gentle echoes of laughter and the warm glow of ingenuity in simplicity guide you tonight as the world outside winds down in its own lullaby of soft moonlit promises. Allow the twinkle of these 1950s tales of mischievous masterminds in aprons to weave gently into your dreams. Drift into slumber with the spirit of Harriet and her delightful antics, feeling warmth in the knowledge that smiles glitter timelessly through history's pages as you lie wrapped in the quiet serenity of this sleepy night. Sweet dreams.